I want to thank you for joining us both in person, but also folks who are watching this hearing from home or from your office to our Housing, Homelessness, and Building Committee hearing. As I often say, with the rapid growth of our city, our top three priorities must be housing, housing, and housing. According to the Building Industry Association, Columbus needs to double our current rate of housing production just to keep up with demand. That means using every tool in our toolbox to address this crisis, and one of those tools is the Community Reinvestment Area, or the CRA program. The CRA is a lever to help us incentivize the development of housing in the neighborhoods that need it most. While other cities across Ohio are grappling with job loss and population decline, Columbus continues to grow. But if we want to manage that growth rather than be overwhelmed by it, we must be intentional. We must be strategic, and we must be ready. Today's hearing will focus on a proposed renewal and update to the city's CRA policy, an effort by the Department of Development to ensure that this tool remains effective and responsive to our community's evolving needs. Before we get into the presentation from the Department of Development, I want to open it up to my colleagues if they have any opening comments. I'm grateful for President Pro Tem Rob Dorans being here, Councilmember Beatty, and Councilmember Deakar for joining us at this hearing. Hearing no opening comments from the colleagues, I want to introduce Deputy Director Aaron Prosser and Jeremy Heater-Durut. Did I just mess that up?
Heater-Durut.
Okay. Program Manager from the Department of Development. Please correct me. I'll turn it over to you guys. And Councilmember Brosa de Padilla.
Thank you. Members of Council, Chair Harden. Thank you again for the opportunity to bring forward for your consideration updates to our residential tax incentive program. It's a key program in the Columbus housing strategy and an impactful tool to help getting new housing built. Existing stock can be stabilized and improved, and allows us to include income restricted and protected affordable units in our city's highest demand and most expensive neighborhoods. This program is one that requires significant amount of calibration to maximize the benefits of building the housing we need, but also providing the inclusive affordable housing opportunities for individuals and families. What is the gap between what it costs to build new housing and where are the rents needed to support those costs? What is the value of the abatement to fill that gap, and is there remaining capacity to capture affordable units in that project? Those are the questions we ask consistently, making sure that we are delivering on both of those with this tool. In other growing cities, they simply waited for the rents to be high enough to fill that gap, and that's not a tactic we wanted to see here in Columbus. We use this tool to overcome the high cost of construction, and we will not rely on increasing rents to bring the new housing we need. This update that Jeremy will walk through is incredibly important to the administration of the program, but at this time, we are not recommending changes to the affordability requirements for 3 reasons. First, the cost of construction has only increased since our 2022 update of the affordability requirements. This narrows the capacity for reduced rents to meet those affordability requirements. In 2018 and in 2022, we utilized the gap analysis with a cash-on-cash return as a variable to serve as a proxy for the overall project feasibility to determine how much affordability we could require while still maintaining it as a valuable tool to build new housing. The following variables were evaluated: the cost of construction, the land costs, the operating expenses, and the debt service cost. As the team looked at those factors now in 2025, all of them have risen over those categories since 2022, indicating there is not additional capacity for deeper or wider affordability at this time. The National Association of Home Builders estimates that the cost of construction materials since 2020 has escalated 36%. Land value in Franklin County has increased 19% annually. And the interest rates have increased since the beginning of 2022 from 3.25% to now 7.5%. Therefore, the gap and the ability to capture additional affordability has only decreased and not expanded. And again, we don't want to render this tool ineffective and then rely on the increase in rents to build the housing we need. Secondly, we have very little data available from the last update because of the transition periods that are built into the code. Jeremy will cover this in greater detail in his presentation, but projects with permits issued prior to August 31st, 2023 remain under the 2018 policy. The length of time that these projects take mean that we are still have many coming in under that previous policy, leaving little information and data to provide you since the 2022 update. Once that burns off, we will be able to provide that robust data for future decision making. And finally, we're working hard to improve the management of the program. Jeremy has done a big lift this year to ensure that the administration of the program is effective timely, and user-friendly for our residents and partners. The administration updates proposed today will greatly improve the ability of the team to manage this critical tool. It also allows our program to be predictable and consistent in an environment where so much else is changing. This will be important as we work with our partners to build the units we need to serve our existing residents and welcome new individuals and families to Columbus. I'm now going to hand it over to Jeremy Heater-Druitt to talk about the proposals we have to update the program in front of you today.
Good afternoon, Chair Hardin and members of City Council. My name is Jeremy Heater-Druitt, Program Manager for the Residential Tax Incentive Program. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you this afternoon on the Department of Development's proposal for legislative updates to this program. I will first discuss how this incentive serves our residents and how it fits into the Columbus housing strategy, present on the various updates to the program over these past 7 years, identify program outcomes to date, and discuss our current proposal and next steps. First, I want to identify how this program serves our residents. As Council is well aware, the housing market in Central Ohio is not in balance to produce the naturally occurring affordability that our region had benefited from for so long. Housing demand has outstripped housing supply, which compounds upon the costs of operating expenses and construction costs. All these costs flow down to the end rent or mortgage that our residents pay. Through the Residential Tax Incentive Program, we are able to offer a 15-year property tax abatement on improvements to residential construction. This reduction in the cost of delivering housing helps to offset the rising housing costs that our residents bear. Within the Columbus housing strategy, the city has identified 4 pillars, and this program does play a role in all 4. Through building, this incentive helps to bring online newly constructed units and to rehabilitate units that have fell into disuse and extend their useful life. Preserve and invest. By investing in housing renovation, we can preserve existing affordability and direct investment into these units. If you are a homeowner fixing your roof or adding an addition onto your home, you're not only investing in yourself, but you're also investing in your neighborhood and in your community. We don't want that good work to be penalized through higher taxation, as the county auditor would eventually, through reassessments, reassess that property for the improvements and add taxable value. Approximately 41% of our applications to the program are single-family rehabs, and include, through the affordability requirements that many projects through the program are required to provide, we can ensure that there's a range of unit types at varying price points in neighborhoods all across the city, including in high-opportunity neighborhoods. As the housing market in Central Ohio has changed, Council has responded to the challenge through multiple updates to this program. Before 2018, the city offered a small number of neighborhood-specific CRAs. This traditional approach going into 2018 was inadequate to the challenge of the time for 2 primary reasons. First, these CRAs were concentrated in intercity neighborhoods, avoiding higher opportunity and higher rent neighborhoods where housing options were also needed. Second, at that time, the program had no affordability requirements as a condition of projects to benefit from this incentive. Due to these concerns, Council took action in 2018 by adding our 3-tier area designation system, which assigned each existing and future CRAs with an economic vitality indicator, which informed which set of affordability requirements were levied for projects developed in those areas. Market-ready areas encompassed our highest rent and highest demand areas, ready for revitalization for neighborhoods in transition, and ready for opportunity for neighborhoods that needed the most investment. And from 2018 onwards, the city continued to create CRAs on an as-needed basis to support housing development. In 2022, with a very different housing market, even compared to just 4 years prior, Council recognized that the program could extract more public benefit from the incentive by increasing the affordability requirements on rental projects, as well as by introducing a new income qualification requirement for homeownership in the market-ready and ready for revitalization areas. In 2023, in order to ensure that we were supporting housing development in high-demand neighborhoods and offer the incentive in more eligible areas, Council took legislative action again to create the Columbus Housing CRA, which in effect tripled the program's eligibility area, and it is currently offered for about 85% of parcels in the city. I want to identify, though, that while the incentive is available for 85% of the city's parcels, there are only about 1.5% of city parcels currently benefiting from the incentive as of year-end 2024. That brings us to 2025 and our current proposal, which I will return to in a moment once we discuss how the incentive has performed to date. So far, my team has worked really hard to improve the program in ways that did not require a code change. For example, we are very excited to work on a new application that we're going to be launching soon that will streamline the number of sections applicants are required to fill out. It has already streamlined the cost certification, reduces the number of pre- and post-construction photos applicants need to submit, and we are solidifying the affordability requirements earlier in the application. Furthermore, by way of data, from 2019 to the present, this incentive has helped to bring online 16,000 housing units, both renovated and new build. I also want to identify that among those units, about 1,200 are affordable directly due to the requirements of this program at 60, 80, or 100% AMI. And on top of that, we also have about 1,400 units that were developed by our affordable housing partners. While those extra 1,400 were not created directly due to the requirements of this program is vital to help those projects pencil out and bring them online in the first place. For example, low-income housing tax credit projects or LIHTC projects, whose rents will stabilize at 60% AMI across all the units, but could be offered as low as 30% AMI or as high as 80% AMI. Those projects rely on this incentive to come online. And we also work with lots of other affordable housing partners, such as Habitat for Humanity, Homeport, Homes on the Hill, and many others. Building permit issuance was up 15% between 2023 and 2024, indicating the strength of this program to bring units online. And I also want to highlight that due to limitations in Ohio Revised Code, this incentive is one of the few ways the city can create inclusive housing options. Under Ohio law, we cannot mandate affordability as a condition of zoning or other factors. It must be tied to a voluntary incentive such as this one. Oops. That brings us to today. What is our focus for updates for the incentive in 2025? We propose a set of updates that will improve our residents' experience of working with the city by way of improving how the city administers and delivers the incentive. By making ourselves more efficient, we are not only saving on labor and time, but we can be more responsive to the public and reduce the complexities they need to deal with in order to benefit from the incentive and focus on delivering the housing units we need. First, we are proposing an update to the program's geography to incorporate recent annexations. A quirk of Ohio Revised Code is that when a parcel is annexed into the city, it is not inherently part of the CRA, therefore the parcel cannot inherently apply for the incentive. And while Council did take action in 2023 to create the nearly citywide CRA, Council does need to take legislative action to incorporate those parcels into the program. And we've identified about 1,300 housing units in these newly annexed areas that by expanding the geography of the program, we can help to bring them online and deliver these units far and wide. Next, we're proposing legislative updates that will enable the simplification of documentation for our affordability requirements. To record what a project's specific affordability requirement will be, the project sponsor and the city enter into a CRA agreement, which is about a 13-page document. And for some projects, such as market rate developments, that level of detail is indeed necessary. But for certain projects where we already know they are deeply affordable, that level of detail is not necessary, and we can reduce that agreement to, say, 1 or 2 pages. An example is those LIHTC projects that I mentioned earlier. Because those units average to 60% AMI, and because we have documentation from the Ohio Housing Finance Agency to back that up, we don't need to go through such lengthy processes to document what we already know to be true about the project. Next, we're proposing to standardize the program's application fee structure across all 3 area designations. This will allow us to more effectively communicate with the public by having the fee rely solely on the number of units in the project with a cap. This will help us to not only communicate with the public, but also how we process those checks. Next, we are proposing to centralize the housing officer designation into the Director of Development or their designee. A quirk of Ohio Revised Code is that when a city creates a CRA program like this one, the city in code designates someone to be the housing officer who has the vested power to approve applications and sign off on other matters such as our annual state compliance filings. At present, depending on the part of city code or depending on the ordinance, that housing officer could either be the Director of Development or the housing administrator. And so by centralizing the housing officer into just the Director of Development or their designee, we can simplify our internal approval paths, which allow us to approve applications even quicker. And by allowing a designee, the team can keep working on applications even the director is not physically on site. We are also proposing to extend the minimum program review cycle from the current 3 years to instead be 5 years. The way we've structured policy changes in this program does not allow for an effective 3-year look back, as we include an approximately 1-year transition period from policy to policy. By way of example, the 2022 policy, while indeed legislated in July of 2022, Council also legislated a 1-year transition period. So for projects that had their permits issued by August 31 of 2023, they could rely on the prior rules. This was done to ensure that projects that were already underway were not affected by legislative changes mid-construction. And due to that, at present, we have had less than 2 years of impact data to look at. And as Aaron identified, construction cycles are long, projects need to get their permitting, their zoning, their financing, and indeed, we can even still receive applications today that rely on the new rule, or that can still rely on the old rules, as applicants were required to file within 2 years following project completion. I just want to identify, though, that while we are proposing to extend that minimum review period to 5 years, that does not in any way, shape, or form preclude council from acting sooner than that. An example is the Columbus Housing CRA in 2023. That tripling of the program geography, which was indeed a major change, that happened in between review cycles. And we will also continue to supply council with an annual report due at the end of every September. That is also in Chapter 4565. And so we will continue to update council on the program's performance on an annual basis. What comes next for the incentive? The team will continue identifying program improvements and track annexations. We will analyze the impact of Zone In and the affordable height bonus and determine if any changes to the affordability requirements can take place in the future. Thank you for your attention to this matter, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Director, and thank you for providing council with an overview of the CRA update. Are there any questions from my colleagues? I have a few to get us started. How do we know that the current CRA program is successful and necessary, just on the basic level? I mean, especially as you talked about the current environment for building, can you talk about how do we know that we need a CRA and a citywide CRA in general?
Yeah, so I want to identify that we have produced over 16,000 units that have benefited from this incentive. And that uptick has been rather large recently. And 2024 and 2025 have by far been the largest years for program involvement. About 4,000 units a year. Prior to that, it was about 1,000, 1,500 or so. Uptake is high, and projects rely on this incentive to bring the units online. Also, by way of example, prior to the 2018 update, LIHTC units, the ones that are about 60% AMI on average, they did not always seek out the incentive in order to pencil out. Now they do. And the incentive is really necessary to bring our most deeply affordable units online.
And as we think about how, we always say that there's no silver bullet when it comes to housing, especially the needs that we have to supercharge our ability to build. How does the CRA fall into the larger housing portfolio or housing strategy that, Aaron, you lead?
Thank you, President Hart and members of council. Yes, this is part of a broader strategy that really hits at the different price points we need to serve the community members. This is a tool that really serves that lower and middle income families in our community, especially in high demand areas. So it really functions as that inclusive housing tool. It is not sufficient to deliver deep affordability. There is a value to this program, and it allows us to include a portion of the units. It is not significant enough, as we've looked at that gap analysis, to do deep affordability or require 100% of the units to be in that affordability category. It's one that we calibrate really tightly because it is, as Jeremy mentioned, the only tool we have to include that affordability in those high demand areas. So you think about places around, say, Ohio State University and the access to jobs, that creates a high demand that rises rents because of that high demand. It makes it extremely difficult for our low-income housing tax credit developers to enter that market because it is competitive. And so our ability to include affordability in those places is so limited, and this becomes the tool that allows us to do that. They are income restricted and protected, and they are there and available, again, with access to jobs, amenities, education, in a way that we don't have another tool to utilize. It fills this specific goal and need that we have, and it is complemented by our investment of bond dollars for deeply affordable projects, our support through our home dollars we receive from the federal government, and 9% low-income housing tax credits to deliver permanent supportive housing. And it is a tool that is utilized across the spectrum just, again, to support those projects. But it is unique in that tapestry around how we actually deliver that inclusive housing.
When we, I know we have talked in the past, and we've heard from some of our friends in the building community around the pace in which post-development we process some of our CRA. I know your team has taken this very seriously. I think you hit on it a little bit earlier, but can you talk through some of the efficiencies that you are working through to make sure that we're able to operate a program and move it through, because time is money and money is passed on to higher rents to our renters. So how are we as a city accepting that maybe our process was clunky and slower, and how are we making it faster and more efficient?
Yes, thank you, Chair Harden, for that question. As I mentioned, my team and I have been working very hard to update the application in ways that did not require a code change. Simplifying how we certify final costs was very important to that, as was reducing the number and style of photos pre and post construction, as well as how the application is actually presented. Prior to 2023, the program was entirely paper-based. Now we are in an online portal called neighborly.com, and we are fully in Neighborly from start to finish for applications. And I want to identify that this year, our approval rate is over 4 times that of prior years, thanks to additional hiring and thanks to those process improvements. And so with these proposals we're proposing today, these things did require a code change, and they're still deeply meaningful to continue that progress.
One of the things that and I'm just asking questions because I'm just waiting for, I know a couple of my colleagues. I got one more. Just one of the things that I heard from, I advocated for, and I know a couple of my colleagues did as well, was so we are creating this level of affordability out in community, out in neighborhoods, but how in the world does a person know where these affordable housing units are? Our affordable units are mixed within market rate places, and a person who knows themselves that they would qualify for affordability may not expect that this building right here actually has a few units set aside specifically for them. Can you talk about what we have how we're going to work towards a solution to that?
I do think it's indicative, too, of the broader priority we've all had about including affordability. Affordability doesn't look any different than the market rate units, which is absolutely the right path. However, it makes it challenging for folks to know that those are affordable units, that they're available to folks who are social workers in our communities or nurses at Ohio State. And so one of the things I'm particularly excited about with the improvements that Jeremy and his team have made with these particular code changes, it's going to open up the capacity for the team to be more forward-facing and front-facing about where those units are. I think we are very interested in a number of platforms that could help us get in front of the community members so that they're aware of where these units are and they can identify what would make sense for them. And so these process improvements also allow us to be involved in some of those broader initiatives as well to improve the program even further so that people know what those units are and they can find them and get access to them.
Sure, thank you. I think clearly stated, we want to see a website where you can go on and say, at this complex, there are this many units available. That's kind of complex because it's always moving and people are moving in and out. But I think that getting that commitment that we're moving in that direction to have that outwardly facing platform for our residents is a exciting and big step. And council looks forward to working with you to get there. Any questions from my colleagues? Council.
No, you go. I'll go. Good afternoon, and thank you for the presentation today. I have a slightly different question, or a question kind of in another direction. You know, last night, council had a community meeting on the east side, which is where I grew up, and I grew up in what I would explain, which people of a certain age would understand, a very Archie Bunker neighborhood, right? That was a lot of people's starter homes. It's our family's forever home. And I think about folks who are aging in place. I think about the diversity of the community that I grew up in, certainly, right? We had folks who, you know, we lived across from union members. We lived across from people who owned their own businesses. We were an economically diverse neighborhood. That has changed, right? Especially in some of our legacy neighborhoods where folks have been there for a long time. My question is, and this is something that came up last night as we were talking to folks, what is the benefit if you're on the other side of this, right? If you are not looking to build a home, you're not looking to maybe make that improvement, you're a longtime resident who's living in a community, these CRAs we know affect their quality of life too. And when we talk about the diversity of neighborhoods and being economically diverse and providing that opportunity for folks to live wherever they want to live in the city of Columbus, but can you just talk about what the benefits are for a community as a whole and not just that person who might be getting that tax abatement?
Absolutely. And President Hardin, Councilmember Burros de Padilla, this is something that we monitor quite closely and thinking about what is impacting property values, which then impacts property tax bills for our existing residents, and how do we work with partners to understand how this can be helpful. And I think the primary issue is this allows us to build more units. We know that it is the scarcity of housing that is driving up property values. The property tax bills are increasing because we don't have enough housing, and that competition is driving up those sales prices, which are reflected then when the auditor does their reassessment. As Jeremy mentioned, the total number of parcels that currently receive an abatement as of the end of 2024 is 1.5% of our city. So it is a very small amount, and as you look at the affordability numbers that Jeremy put up, that is a pretty significant amount of benefit for a very small number of parcels in our community. The more we have that new construction, and again, Jeremy mentioned between 2023 and 2024, we were up 15% on our building permitting. I would put that at the feet of this program. We are doing something in a way that other cities didn't do. We are intervening in the only real way we have to impact that cost of construction. We can do a lot to adjust our regulatory frameworks and sort of those types of barriers. This is the one way we can enter what is really truly a cost barrier to housing construction. It allows us to do denser projects. It allows us to do projects that are more complicated because they're infill in those high demand areas. It relieves the pressure on that existing neighborhood. It allows it to be more stabilized. And as we talked about earlier, it is a part of that broader strategy where we are also able to intervene through our housing division on home repair and supporting our low-income homeowners so they can stay housed. We are limited under the Ohio Revised Code. We are only able to issue this policy and program through investment or improvement on a property. We do not have the ability in the city of Columbus to put this program to use for existing residents that aren't making those investments. As Jeremy mentioned, about 41% of the people who are utilizing this program are our single-family homeowners, and since the update in 2022, we have an income restriction on that. And so as folks receive benefits through either our program or programs from partners like Healthy Homes and other folks around the community doing those home rehab programs, we're able to use this tool so that they are not destabilized again by an increasing property tax bill. We are only allowed to do that when they make that improvement. We would welcome the opportunity to expand that and think differently about it, but right now we are restricted by the Ohio Revised Code. But again, it adds more units, relieving the pressure, relieving that escalation of property values that people are feeling, and also allows us to have that included affordability throughout those high-rent neighborhoods. So we're a little bit hemmed in by what we can do under the enabling legislation, but it does affect the ecosystem in a positive way as well.
And I think that that's a continued conversation with folks, because I think that that is, folks have lots of feelings about tax abatements and lots of feelings about this strategy and what that looks like. And I think a lot of it is about the impact that it has on them, the impact that it has on the greater community. I think threading the needle for folks as we think about density and as we talk about density, it also will bring for some of those communities that are waiting for those very, well, we may call them amenities, they're really the basic needs that they want, right? Bringing more people into your community helps to bring some of those things that you want, where we have food deserts, where we have other amenities that maybe were once there but went away because people in the community started to leave, right? The community started to change. And I think ensuring that folks understand what that balance looks like, because that property values, certainly, especially as we talk about folks who want to age in place, right? That is a growing concern for them. And while there is some things that we are restricted upon doing, because some of it isn't within our jurisdiction or some of it has been, that power has been removed from us, I think it's about how do we bring people along in the conversation to understand how are we meeting both the needs of whoever you might be, right? If you are a housing provider who is looking to partner with us to provide more housing for the folks who are coming, but then certainly for the folks who have been in their house for a long time, been longstanding community stakeholders and are worried about what this is going to mean for them economically, I think it's just, it's a learning process, and bringing folks along and having that conversation is one that we need to continue to have. I think it's hard to have one about who's coming, because I think the people who have been here are starting to feel a little left out of that conversation, and ensuring that we are sharing or demystifying some of these processes to really talk directly about what the impact is for them is going to be important. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. Deputy Director and Jeremy, wanted to ask you a couple of questions, put a couple of things in context, and then dig into, I think, some of the things that happened in the last review and sort of where we see that, particularly because we're talking about going to a more extended time period from a review standpoint. So I think this is the opportunity to sort of see a little bit of where the tweaks have been in the past and sort of what the outcomes of that have happened. So I know it was just mentioned a moment ago that 1.5% of parcels within the city are currently under the CRA. Historically, going back to sort of 2019, when we first started putting affordability within this, how does that sort of measure from a historical standpoint? Is that sort of in the middle? Is that high? Is that low? When we think about how much of the city is actually currently receiving a property tax incentive?
Chair Hardin and Councilmember Dorans, thank you for that question. That 1.5% figure that I mentioned, that is valid as of year end 2024. That's the one data point I have for you today. This comes from official county auditor data, which is publicly available on their website. We crunched their numbers to determine how many parcels are currently abated. To go back in time, that can actually very much be done. Currently, the county auditor offers their spreadsheets going back in time as far as 2014. So that analysis is possible, but I don't have those numbers for prior years at my fingertips. We could certainly get it for you.
Okay, thank you. The other sort of question that is similar when we think about that affordability requirement, and I know one of the main focus of these updates is about sort of the administrative aspects of your team has tried to do a lot without having code changes to sort of support the work, and you've been trying to orient the office more towards, I think, making this easier for both internally at the city and folks to, deal with these requirements who are taking advantage of them. But wanted to know sort of what is the process right now, either currently or contemplated under the new proposal that is here for individual entities that are receiving a property tax abatement under the residential policy, letting the city know how often those income restricted units are being utilized. Because Council President mentioned earlier about, one of the things I think we're really excited about is making sure that we as a city are doing a better job of letting folks know that, one, we have helped create thousands of new housing units that have income eligibility requirements. But again, it's important for folks to be able to take advantage of those. So I'm just curious, sort of what is the current process from a reporting standpoint of, how often those units are being utilized, whether or not they're 1 or 2 or 3 bedrooms, how available those are. I'm just curious. I just want to sort of ground myself and just sort of understand more about how that reporting happens currently.
Chair Hardin and Councilmember Dorans, thank you for those questions. Let me take that in a couple different steps. First, the actual application process. This is actually in transition, and we are excited to announce more pretty soon. Hitherto, applicants and the project sponsors in our community are used to a phase 1, phase 2 model. Phase 1 was a preliminary project review. We'd look at pre-construction photos, initial permits, an estimated budget, items like that. That would get people a conditional approval letter that would say, based on what you represented to us, this program fits our codes. Please come back when your project is completed. That triggered phase 2. And so when the final certificate of occupancy or the permits are closed out, the project sponsor would return to us, file their closed out permits, file proof their final cost, items like that. We would then certify the abatement, forward to the county auditor for implementation. And then that homeowner or that rental product gets the abatement for the length of term and the percentage. We are in the midst of a big transition right now where, because so many more projects from a proportionality perspective in the program have some form of affordability requirement, we identified that we need to solidify the affordability requirement for a specific project much earlier in that process. So we are introducing what is called a program review step. This is where project sponsors will relay to us the bare minimum information we need to know to vet the affordability requirement for that project. What are the parcels? What area designation is it in? Which affordability requirement option are you pursuing? We would then execute a CRA agreement to solidify those things much earlier in the process. And then immediately upon submitting that application, you're introduced to a project review application. This will entail the pre and post-construction photos, permits and items like that. It's more of like a live worksheet instead of asking project sponsors to wait until the project's completed. Come back as you get things. That way, there's less daylight between when your project is completed and when we can deliver the incentive. On how we are monitoring the units, as far as the rental units go, there is an annual report that the project sponsors submit to us by every March that details the lease-up activity of that property from the prior calendar year. For the affordable homeownership product, which was introduced with the 2022 policy update, that's a little different. We file a restrictive covenant on the property without annual monitoring. But what that enables us to do is when that property is sold or in transfer, that restrictive covenant is activated, and that new homeowner, that subsequent owner, if they are income qualified, which they would submit new documentation to us, if they're income qualified, they can retain the abatement. If they are not income qualified, the abatement would cease from there on. There is also not a clawback. The years that the first homeowner benefited from the abatement, they retain that value. There's no return on that money. And as far as unit types, that was one update with the 2022 policy. With the 2018 policy, there was not inherently a requirement that developers had to spread their unit types out. So if you had a mixture of studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, et cetera, at that point in time, it was not a requirement to spread those unit types across your affordable units. In the 22 policy, it now is. And so when project sponsors submit that report to us, they do note to us the style of unit that is. That way we make sure that proportionality speaking, they are spreading those units out and making sure that our residents have access to a large swathe of unit types that meet their needs.
And to summarize on this specific point, so one, we're currently, the city sort of gets that snapshot of the utilization of the units on an annual basis. So we have a, sort of a snapshot in time, sort of moving backwards. And I know it's difficult when we're talking about, literally thousands of units. So feel free to sort of ballpark this, and happy to follow up with you after this. But when we talk about, folks setting aside 20% of those units, based upon that snapshot in time, are we seeing the vast majority of those units being utilized by folks within those 80 to 100% AMI, in those snapshots?
Chair Harden and Councilmember Dorans, thank you for that question. What we are seeing is, part of it depends on where the project is in its lease-up cycle. If it's a brand-new product and the project sponsor is still in the lease-up phase, as long as they are leasing out those units on a roughly proportional basis, so let's say it's a 100-unit rental product, but they've only leased up, say, half those units, as long as they fulfilled about half their affordability requirement at that snapshot in time, we consider them compliant. They are still in a lease-up phase. As long as about 20% of those units are affordable, they're fine. I have not seen significant vacancies in the units. Some project sponsors, particularly for the higher-end market rate product, may relay that it's tricky to get the affordable units leased up. I think there's a perception issue. If you are a resident in our community looking for a place to live and you see a shiny new rental product, you may not think there's an opportunity for you, but there is. We've worked that out with project sponsors as they've identified that issue. It hasn't happened a lot. It has been said to me before. And I think your point about making sure that residents know where these units are is well taken.
So again, to move a little bit past that initial period, we're talking about a new rental property coming online, certain amount of units. So again, the city wants to give them a little bit of grace during that period in which, again, literally open up the doors and they're trying to figure out how to, again, lease it up, make sure that it, sort of things move forward. But, when you're talking about, I'm just sort of curious from a compliance standpoint, whether it's year 2, 3, or 4, or 5, if you're not seeing, income restricted units actually being provided to folks that fall within those income categories, that's where the city could step in and say, hey, you need to do more here. And if not, the abatement's going to go away.
Mm-hmm. Chair Harden and Councilmember Doran, thanks for that follow-up question. The CRA agreement that I mentioned earlier in my presentation, this spells out the terms and conditions for those affordable units. That's why I mentioned that 13-page agreement and those full 13 pages are really needed for market rate development. Those are products that would not inherently provide income restricted units, so we need to establish a structure to allow that to happen. When I would say that first year, as long as we see they're in a lease up period, and that'll be very clear from their data, it'll be very clear how recent the final certificate of occupancy was issued. We'll know they're in some stage of lease up, whether very early on or much later. That first year, we just want to make sure that from a proportionality standpoint, whatever units they have leased up, that amongst those units, you have a roughly proportional amount of affordables that are also leased up. Mm-hmm. At that second year, that would, to your point, be a more concerning time. Because housing is in such demand, I'm finding that project sponsors do not have trouble leasing those units up eventually. It is not as if we have project sponsors who are just struggling to fill any of those units. I have not seen this as an issue from year 2 onwards in general.
Okay, thank you. Last question that I have for y'all, and this was, I think a particular piece of that was more controversial during the last update was about including the fee in lieu option. So folks that want to take advantage of the CRA, but rather than reserving the units, that update allowed folks to pay the city a fee in lieu of reserving the units. So one asks, how often has that been utilized, and what are the funds? What funds have been generated, and what have those funds been utilized during that time period?
Chair Harden and Councilmember Dorans, thank you for that question. I'll take the first half, and then I'll have Deputy Director Prosser handle the second part of that question. The first part of the question, how often is this utilized? To date, amongst all the units that had an affordability requirement, about 22% of those units were fulfilled by way of the fee in lieu. Now, that does vary by which policy we're talking about. It does vary by area designation. Happy to get more granular data for you if you wish to have it. But yeah, we're at this very moment anyway, we're seeing roughly 1/4 or so of those affordable units are fulfilled with the fee in lieu. I'll defer to Deputy Director Prosser for the second half of that question.
Certainly, President Harden, Councilmember Dorans, as we look at the opportunity for that fee in lieu option, it was something that was really critical, ensuring that we do have some projects where they're financing, they cannot quite get to the place where the financing partner is comfortable with the inclusion of the units. They have questions about what that looks like at year 15. They have difficulty kind of projecting out the impacts on the project. It's not every project, but certainly something that we see as a hiccup. We do not want to keep those units from coming online because of that financing challenge. And so this is something that, again, about 22% of the projects utilize. Prior to the 2022 update, it was the fee in lieu went to partners in the community that were either Affordable Housing Trust or a community development corporation in a neighborhood. In 2022, we did switch that and brought it into the Department of Development with the intention of using those funds to support the purpose of this program, which is really just access to opportunity, and making sure that as we deploy those funds, we are aligning it with the purpose of this program. So right now, we are, again, as we mentioned, as we're kind of going through that transition period, we are looking to see what that revenue looks like, and then we'll be working with all of you to understand what that looks like for access to opportunity.
And Deputy Director, talking about that percentage of that 22%, are you seeing folks utilize the fee in lieu for all of the units or part of the units? I'm just curious when you talk about that financing issue. I'm assuming that means, we're taking all those off the table simply because like the financing, entity that they're dealing with saying, hey, this is just not something that they're willing to take that risk on for whatever reason. So I'm assuming it means, when someone pays that fee in lieu, they're taking all the units off the table, but just clarifying that whether or not, your folks are taking part of it or not part of it off with that fee.
Yeah. Chair Harden and Councilmember Dorans, thank you for that question. Hitherto, I believe when a project goes for the fee in lieu, I believe to date every single one of those have done that for all of the units in that project. There has been interest in doing some bifurcation. I don't believe it's ever come to pass for a particular project. And I want to identify too that in Director's Rules, which is a document where we codify how we actually administer these documents, how we track the affordable units, items like that, we do require that in such a scenario where a project sponsor is doing that bifurcation, that the fee in lieu is used proportionally against the AMI spectrum. So for example, if a given project, we're doing 10% of units at 60% AMI and 10% at 80% AMI, the project sponsor can't use a fee in lieu just for those 60% AMI units. They can't do the fee in lieu for just the most affordable ones. They would have to split that up proportionally across the 60% and the 80% units.
Thank you. I know I said last question like 2 questions ago, so I appreciate your patience. So Deputy Director, I did want to ask again about the funds. You had mentioned that, again, the transition has been from bringing those funds in-house compared to you being able to utilize them with the Affordable Housing Trust and other entities. When we talk about like what have those been used for, I know you're talking about sort of access, housing access. Are we talking about being able to use those down the line for things like rental assistance, or just want to sort of better understand if 22% of these units are being bought out, there is dollars that are attached to this. Yeah, obviously those are dollars that we want to be able to go back and do good things for people to get roofs over their heads, and just want to sort of better understand where we are today and sort of where we want to go with those funds.
Yep. Chair Harden, Councilmember Dorans, I think that's really as we look across that full, again, spectrum of tools that we're bringing to bear, as we understand what the value is of this program, it is one that could change annually, right? So it's a hard one to set a program that is fully funded by this because we just don't know. It's something that could change as you look at the policy. It's something that we can make changes to in a way that could make it an unsustainable funding source for something that's consistent, let's say staffing or something. I think what we're looking for is how do we increase the access to opportunity? And primarily, it's access to these higher demand neighborhoods, right? Places where you have jobs, amenities, education. How do we make sure that affordability, how do we bring that mixed income opportunity? And the other way families get access to opportunity is through home ownership. And as we continue to look at things like our American Dream Down Payment Initiative, some other ways that partners in the community are thinking about home ownership, it is extremely difficult to access home ownership in Central Ohio and in Columbus if you are middle income family. And we are cutting out a big significant portion of our community with access to not just wealth building, but the stability that comes with home ownership. It is a way that we can build in that housing stability as well for families. So I think we'll be bringing back with all of you some of those ideas about what that could look like, but making sure it has fidelity to the purpose of this program, but also making sure that it's addressing a need for our family and making sure that we have the right tool to fit that part of the overall spectrum.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Director. Appreciate Programmatic. That's all I have.
Hey, thank you, Pro Tem.
Yeah, two quick questions. First, to Council President's question regarding the potential visibility or website as to where the units are located. Would that apply to individually owned single-family homes or condominiums as well? Or would that only apply to apartment units?
Chair Harden and Councilmember Beatty, thank you for that question. That is a decision we will have to make. I think there's a unique difference between the rental product versus the home ownership product. If you're a homeowner that has benefited from the incentive, you are income qualified at 120% AMI or lower, and you have the restrictive covenant on your property, we have that data. And so by way of a public records request, that can always be made available.
Certainly.
I would hesitate to put these homeowners on a map by way of stigma, privacy, but that's a decision we can discuss
like
and make.
Who's on the school lunch program, that
Yeah.
type of deal. Particularly, we still have, units that were under other types of tax abatement programs, such as the units that are downtown, that don't have affordability, that didn't have affordability thing. They were put in place to encourage the building of downtown units or other things like that. And there's some other areas like that too. So that's just something to think through. Okay, the other question that I had, and this is just maybe thinking towards the future. Again, we talked about, and I see Michael Wilkos in the crowd, and I think back to the presentation that he made recently at the Columbus Metropolitan Club that Pro Tem Dorrance was on as well, that, our population growth seems to show us that even though Columbus is thriving, we have this growth in the individuals whom need the housing in the 30% of AMI and down. And I'm sure that you can address this. And we did receive written testimony, for instance, from the Community Shelter Board on this point too, urging that we continue to look at the 30% AMI and down. And I know that the LIHTC deals, which obviously are limited because it's a competitive process, what else could we be doing to encourage more investment building, also preserving more units that are directed towards those that are in the 30% of AMI and below?
Chair Harden, Councilmember Beatty, that's, I think, a question that we wrestle with quite a bit, and how to deliver those units for folks earning below 30% of the area median income is the biggest challenge we have. It requires not only the capital subsidy, but as well as ongoing operational support, both through this program. The residential tax incentive is a key part of that capital stack, but those projects will also need ongoing housing choice vouchers. And the ability to deliver those units in a way that truly serves that population is extremely challenging. So this is really, again, where we rely on the affordable housing bond dollars that the voters of the city of Columbus have twice authorized, and will be asked the question again in November. Our ability to put dollars into those projects and get them up and running to serve that community is a very big priority of that portion of the housing strategy and the investment. Again, it gets coupled with this program, but we use every tool in the toolbox to deliver housing for those earning less than 30%. It takes the biggest lift and the most partners across local, federal, state partnerships, the city, the county. I mean, the capital stacks to deliver that housing is extraordinary. But this is a key component of how we do that. And then we'll continue to look at opportunities, partnerships in other cities and how they've addressed how do we get more housing online so that we can serve that population. And it may be through preservation. I think as we look forward to that next bond package, really opening up some opportunities for innovation around that space as well.
That was a good question, Councilmember, and I was hoping that you took that layup to educate on the bond package that is in front of voters that will allow us to buy down affordability. Because the Councilmember's point and your point, that level of below 30% affordability, we couldn't CRA ourselves into easily in a broad way. So I think that's the conversation that we'll have this fall around what are our opportunities as we see this this growing need. And I think that the shelter system is completely right, that we have to figure out how we at scale start to build that below 30% housing in our community, and we're just not doing that enough right now. And so again, when we talked about the CRA, there's no one tool, no silver tool, but we need to supercharge each of the tools to go as far as we can possibly go. And that bond package that we'll be talking to the community about this fall is one of those very, very, very important tools.
I did have one more quick thing to Jeremy. What I think will be helpful if you could deliver this to Council President's office as well. Just a couple sample CRA agreements, and then also a copy or the instructions for the monitoring report that has to be submitted every year. I mean, I'm familiar with it, but I know others probably aren't, because we do get asked about that accountability. And I think that, you know, if we crystallize it, see what the fields are that have to be filled in and things like that, that'll even help us be able to explain it to the citizens.
Chair Harden, Councilmember Beatty, yes, that we can fulfill that request. Sample CRA agreements and the director's rules document I mentioned earlier, that is a lot of great examples. We try to be helpful for our project sponsors, not only to say, here are your required units, but here are some examples of when person A moves in, but B moves out. How do you handle that from a compliance perspective? What are the reporting deadlines? How is our AMI data informed? Happy to deliver that to you.
See, when we first started questions, I had to put all these questions out there because my colleagues were not, and then we got chatty because I knew that we all care so much and are very thoughtful about this issue. I want to pivot now to a housing development agreement that the city is entering into with Nuveen. This is a big deal for the city of Columbus and for the county, for our community to invest in this amount of affordability in the region. Specific to this conversation, because this development agreement goes deeper in affordability than even the CRA would get us to naturally. So could you talk about the agreement, and then we'll have a couple questions.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Harden. So we do have a housing development agreement with a development partner, Nuveen. They have presented us with a pretty significant opportunity to bring new affordable units online, address a challenging property, and also to shore up an existing affordable product in our community. So it is 1,268 units that would be delivered by this housing development agreement. The housing development agreement is related to our bond package, and it is one way that we commit to that project based on some specific criteria. It is not the bond agreement that would ultimately come with the greater details, but it's important for the other capital stack financing. So as our partners build these capital stacks, they often require documentation that they have access to these funds. And I think what we see here is that kind of mid-moment where we need to have that conversation with Nuveen, make sure that they're ready to go with the other pieces and parts of their portfolio, primarily because we are going to ask them to get into that pre-development work specifically on the Latitude 525 site. So that is one that they will be working on us with. The second is a new construction project on Norton Road, which would deliver affordability. Again, these are bond package projects coupled again with that capital stack that includes that low-income housing tax credits. So below 80% of the area median income, averaging out at 60% AMI for 100% of the units. And then the final is existing project called Wedgwood, and the ability to shore that up, make the investment we need to keep that affordability in our community. As we continue the conversations, again, we are one part of that capital stack. They will continue to run down the other financing. The housing development agreement allows us to be a partner when they get that capital stack completed. If anything happens in the meantime and they're not able to get that across the finish line, it does not obligate the city. We really are showing up that we are indicating a future partnership with the housing development agreement. These are really impactful programs and opportunities that will deliver some really meaningful affordability. The commitment in the housing development agreement across those three projects is $25 million. Again, those are bond package dollars that we'll bring to the table to get those projects across the finish line. When we look back, as we've deployed the housing bond dollars to date, on a multifamily rental project coupled with that low-income housing tax credits, we're about $23,000 a unit is the investment that we make through those bond dollars. In this instance, given those 1,268 units, it's a little shy of $20,000 for each unit. So it is a little bit lower than our typical per unit cost, even though the project overall is quite a large amount with the 25 million. It really does pencil out pretty close to what our investment typically is. And again, it really addresses a couple particular projects like Wedgwood and Latitude 525 that we are very excited to have back online and back with affordability to serve community members in high quality affordable housing. And then the ability to bring the new Norton Road project online as well with additional affordable housing units. So they are a new partner in the community. We're excited to have them. I think we all know if we're going to build the amount of units we need, and particularly the amount of affordable units we need, we're going to need additional partners working with us, in addition to the strength of our existing local development community. So this is a really exciting opportunity. It's a step in the path that we typically take. This is a pretty comprehensive package that we've put together, but we're excited to continue to work with them to get those affordable units across the finish line.
Both of my questions you kind of hit on already. One was price per unit, but also I'm intrigued and excited about several parts of. I mean, it's a big package, 1,200 units of affordable, 60 to 80% AMI. We just talked about how difficult it is to get that level of affordability. But what really piqued my interest was Wedgwood. And it's not just to hold the affordability there, it's to come in, renovate, and engage in a community safety project. We know as city leaders that Wedgwood is one of the most unsafe parts of our city. There's a lot of criminal activity that is happening there. There are a lot of seniors and folks that are living in what I think this council would see as in situations that are below our standards for a city like Columbus. And one of the things that intrigued me specifically about this was Nuveen's ability to do that restorative work in terms of community safety in Wedgwood. But as exciting as that, so I'm hitting on 2 points, and I would like for your feedback, is that if Wedgwood would not to happen, our agreement would waterfall off of that. So would you just hit on those two pieces again for me?
Yes, thank you, Chair Harden. And I think one of the most impactful ways that we show up in affordability is that this council, our administration, the way we've approached it at the City of Columbus, it is not just about cheaper units, right? It is not just about a lower rent amount. It is about safe, stable, and secure housing that is affordable. All of those things have to be the case for us to feel like we are legitimately delivering for our community members. And I think for Wedgwood, that is the really big opportunity. It's 649 units.
Wow.
And to be able to bring those up and restore restore them and to maintain the affordability while improving the conditions is something I think we look for across the city, and the opportunity to improve that product, but also make sure that it maintains the affordability. This is one of those really great opportunities. They are in conversation with the owners of that project. There are some additional federal components to that project through HUD that's allowing those conversations to be hopefully fruitful. But yes, if they do not end up getting that deal done with that existing property owner, then it would not be part of our commitment any longer. So they are working that through. We are hopeful, but it is something that while we've made the commitment, should they get everything else in order, if they do not come to fruition, then we would not continue to make that commitment.
Thank you. Councilmember.
Well, speaking of Wedgwood, this kind of came to my mind. In Wedgwood, we have a lot of apartments that have far too many family members because we have a lot of new Americans who have large families. And in a lot of our apartment complexes, we're talking 1, 2-bedroom apartments and sometimes like 3. We need apartment buildings that have apartments with more bedrooms. And is that being considered, especially in Wedgwood, where we have so many of these large families, that maybe you need to have fewer units, but have them be larger to accommodate this community?
Chair Harden, Councilmember Diaco, I think that is one of the great challenges that we're going to face. And I think, again, as we look forward on the bond package and thinking about how do we encourage or require more family-sized units, the market will not naturally deliver those units, right? As our folks are financing projects, even if they wanted to, a lot of times when they're going through that financing exercise, the bank is going to look at the per square foot revenue. And when you're looking at a 1-bedroom and say you charge $500 for the 1-bedroom, if you have a 2-bedroom, you don't charge $1,000. It doesn't double. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where it ends up being much more of the studios, 1s and 2s, and we don't see those family-sized units. And I think that will be something that we'll be interested in talking about as to how do we use our policy levers to mend that gap and figure out how do we get those projects so that we can get those family-sized units, because they have been built in the past. We have some of that inventory, it's not enough. And I think if we can start to unwind how we finance those types of projects, how can we enter the project through our bond investment to get those family-sized units? Because it is really critical that we have also not just the volume and the affordability, but compatible with what families need, especially in some of these communities.
Thank you, because that's a huge problem.
Councilmember, your question just made me think about something with your other hat on, the Bethel United Methodist project that specifically are trying to work on more than 3-bedroom apartments because of the
community has
community
so
that it
many
serves
large families.
up that way. But it's again, that does not happen naturally in this market. So you really have to lean in on it. Very important.
You know, for instance, like Nationwide Children's Hospital, Healthy Homes program, many of the units that they're building, not in apartment complexes, but little duplexes and other things like that, are putting 3 bedrooms and accommodation for basement and things like that. And it's gonna, at least from my understanding in apartment multifamily trends, it's gonna be tough for people to put 3 bedrooms. In fact, one thing that has not come to Columbus very much is micro units, smaller units, 1 bedrooms and shared things and all kinds of things. So it'll be interesting. It's a tough time for development, right now. But certainly that's what we've heard from many that need because of the family size. And it may be, unfortunately, it's so competitive in the single family house realm right now. That's where the absorption of that may be, and if we can use tools for that somehow in the future. But larger conversation.
You can see my entire council is a housing caucus because I think we say it over and over again that we believe that housing is our 1, 2, and 3 issue if we want to keep Columbus an affordable place for people to live. And we're already seeing the waves of what growth can mean to a community as we fight to keep the affordability. We all saw our property taxes go up 35 to 40%. and all of these things that we are talking about, the CRA, all of these different tools that we're talking about, is to fight to make sure that Columbus is the last affordable big city as we go into that big city stage. And I want our community to really understand that that's the goal. In that direction, it's time for public testimony. A person who sings the chorus, sings to all of us around our necessity to lean in on housing. The first speaker to come before council is Mr. Michael Wilkos. Mr. Wilkos, welcome to council. It is. And
Council President Harden, members of City Council, it's always nice to be with you and support the great work that's going on in our city. My name is Michael Wilkos. I'm Vice President at United Way of Central Ohio, but I'm also in my third year as Chair of the Continuum of Care. That is our community's planning body that looks at applications and ranks applications for funding. I'm here today to share that I'm in full support of the updates and renewal of the Community Reinvestment Area Program, as well as the Housing Development Agreement with Nuveen for the 3 affordable housing developments. Our community has a documented shortage of affordable housing, and I believe that anything that we can do to increase the supply and availability of affordable housing is greatly needed. While the poverty rate in the city of Columbus is just under 18%, there is another 25% of our city that is considered ALICE. That is an acronym that stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. This is a measurement term that was created by United Way worldwide and helps every community across the country more accurately understand the scale of those who struggle with rising housing costs, food, transportation, and medical care. This more inclusive tool was created to address the fact that the measurement for poverty is widely considered to be outdated, and the poverty measurement is more of a national tool, and this goes right down to the local level to say this is what you need to survive in Franklin County. Additionally, Zillow reported last year that rents in Columbus jumped 8.8% in just the first 10 months of the year. And Greg Colburn, a national researcher and author of the book Homelessness is a Housing Problem, was recently in Columbus, and he shared the data from his research. He shared that there are 2 factors that predict whether or not a community will see increases in homelessness: when rental vacancy rates hit 5% or lower, and when rent increases faster than income growth. Columbus has now achieved both of those measures. There is still time for Columbus to get ahead of other growing cities that have exorbitant housing costs and crises in homelessness. Build more housing. I appreciate all of the hard work that this council achieves to expand housing choice, location, and availability of affordable housing. And again, I strongly support the CRA program updates, expansion, and the housing agreement with Nuveen, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them.
Michael, you're in conversations a lot with community members
Yes.
who question the need or necessity of this council, this city, to lean in on this type of abatement.
Yeah.
Would you continue to educate us on why this tool, again, we shouldn't use it everywhere, we should guard it, we should ask questions, we should publicize obviously where we have them, but why is this tool a necessity in our market?
So I can share with you that I get in my role at United Way the opportunity to interact with a lot of nonprofits. We fund 65 organizations in the county, 88 programs, but we raise dollars from across the community in a lot of corporate settings. So I get to be in the space of meeting with staff at nonprofit organizations, the board of trustees of those organizations, as well as the companies and individuals that donate to United Way. I can tell you that whether I'm also speaking to a realtor group in New Albany or I'm talking with folks in the shelter system, I can tell you that housing is perceived as the number 1, the number 2, and number 3 issue, no matter where I go. One of the things that I always point out when I'm providing education is that as recently as 2010, there were 107 housing units for every 100 households. By 2020, we were down to just 102 for every 100 households. And I believe something really fundamentally shifted in that decade, which is I think a lot of people would talk about affordable housing and they would be othering folks when they would do it because they really wouldn't understand basically income requirements, and it always seemed to be this complicated thing for somebody else. But by 2020, I think you just reverse the order of affordable housing to housing affordability. And now you've got the teacher and the firefighter with 2 children who are struggling. And by the way, the ALICE living wage for a family of 4 in Franklin County is actually $90,000 a year for that type of household. Obviously, that's driven by huge childcare costs. What I would suggest is that I think there is a huge education that needs to be shared in the community that only 1.5% of parcels are abated. I think that there is a belief that there's a lot of property tax abatement, and that if all of these properties were paying their full and fair share, we wouldn't have financial constraints. So I think that's a space where we could all be better at educating that. I was educated just today when Director Prosser said that information. And so the housing dialogue, I think, is very present for folks. And then lastly, based on those ratio of how many housing units to households, we're on track to be at just 96 housing units for every 100 households based on the current trajectory of population growth and the delivery of units. And what I say to folks in more of a casual conversation is kind of buckle up, because what you're seeing now is a tough housing market. We don't have the crisis that every single growing large West Coast and central city like a Denver or an Austin are experiencing, where you see those communities that have a more balanced housing market, say a Houston or an Atlanta. Those are huge growing cities, but they have much more reasonable housing costs because they have metropolitan regions that are simply delivering a lot of product. I recently heard Bobby Schottenstein, the CEO of MI Homes, in a public forum say that his company can deliver the same square footage home in the Houston market for about $135,000 less than what he builds the same home in the Columbus market. And he says the number one difference is how big his lots need to be in suburban Columbus. And if every community across metropolitan Columbus had Columbus's zoning code, we would not have an affordable housing crisis. And so that's a true testament to what's happening in our own city.
Michael, you mentioned, we talked about this, Councilmember Beatty referenced the CMC forum where we were talking about housing and talking about growth in the region. And you talked about something that I think struck a chord with a lot of people about having affection for your community. And I think, a lot of times when I am a very practical person, and when I think sometimes even sitting in this seat, when we talk about AMIs and we talk about percentages and we talk about whatever, we certainly need to have that conversation because there's going to be folks who very clearly understand that, right? I think there's perception, there's reality, there's a feeling that you have, right, that drives what you believe to be true, right? I talk about this a lot in when we talk about traffic, right? You feel like every car is speeding down your street, even if it might be just a few cars that are actually speeding, right? But when you're standing still and something's moving, it feels a lot faster, right? And when we talk about affection, I think this idea, and this is, I was thinking of you when I asked this question to Deputy Director Prosser, just around when we talk about making it, easing the tension in the market to make it easier for more houses, for more different types of houses, whether you're talking about micro apartments, an ADU, a single family home, the gamut, right, to come into your community. What does that mean for the people who already live there, right? And I think that is the ongoing tension that we have, right? It's not just about NIMBYism, the not in my backyard, but it's also, I think that people just generally, you work very hard to get this little plot of land that you now call yours, right, on the street that you want, in the place that you want it. And now you're telling me that more people are coming, which to me thinks that's more traffic, that's more problems, that's more of all these things, right? And so can you just talk for a second about again, I think from a practical standpoint and from that affection standpoint for where we live, when we talk about these strategies, what that means for the entire community. Because I think that people are only looking at it maybe from we're inviting all these folks in, but again, what about me? I've been here for 20 years, I've been here for 30 years. What do I get? What does this do for me?
Yep. So there's a quote that I love using every time I give a talk. It's by a longtime Chicago Tribune columnist, Sidney Harris, and the quote is, "People love change and they hate it at the same time. What they really want is for things to remain the same but get better." And so when you have change, the question becomes, am I viewing that change as a good thing, or am I viewing that as some kind of threat? The other thing I think is really important for us to kind of level set the community is, I think most people, when they come into a room where we're going to discuss change, we fall into these very easy narratives of a victim and villain, right? And we're trying to immediately decide, am I as the listener going to connect with the victim and empower that victim, or am I going to try to tear down the villain? And so when we talk about development and housing, I think sometimes people view the developer as the villain, but the villain in the story is lack of supply, right? I'll quote our own Council President Hardin when he says, the first sign of the tight housing market is your property taxes going up. If you wait for the third or fourth sign, you've waited way too long. And so what I think is changing across the region, and something that we should continue to work with that narrative, is to say the villain in our story is lack of housing choice. It's lack of housing typology. We're not building the housing that aligns with who we are. And one of the things we need to do is change policy so we can create the housing that looks like who we have become as a city. That could be micro units. I mean, just 48 hours ago, I had the pleasure to be in this room for the accessory dwelling unit hearing. There were 17 people who spoke, and all 17 were in favor of it. And I thought, how often do you go to a public meeting and everyone who registers is for something? That personally felt really good. And so this whole issue is, I think, let's change that narrative so people understand the villain in the story is we don't have enough housing. And simply put, I mean, this gets complicated, it's emotional, but simply put, a home is where a job goes at night. Mm-hmm. And the jobs are coming here, and they're coming here for a lot of really good reasons. 41% of this county has a college degree. We get ample rainfall. We have good developable land. We have rail and highway access. And look at all the companies that are finding Columbus is a good place to do business. We need to be responsive to that and add the home to the job. And that home just is going to look different than the narrative that we have culturally been fed, which is a 3 and 4 bedroom detached single family home. That is simply not who Columbus is, and it's not who the United States is.
Thank you.
No, and thank you for that, because I just think in this conversation, if we're only dealing with numbers or terms that folks they don't understand what it means at the end of the day, because we could do an entire presentation, someone will still come up to this podium and say, I still don't want this. None of this matters, because we're not talking at the end of the day to the thing that they care about most.
I believe the change that people should fear is for us to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
That's right. Thank you.
We for us Columbus kids, we used to be and are fighting to be in an affordable city.
Right.
To around housing. The change is for us not to be. And you're 100% right. That the way that we get there is by doing nothing.
Right. Exactly.
And we would have done that way. Well, let's see if we will meet Councilmember Beatty's streak of having all supportive speakers. We only have one more speaker.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
It is Roy Lowenstein. We'll see if he is supporting the policy or not to keep up with that track record. Roy, welcome to council.
President Hardin, members of council, thanks for the opportunity to come and speak. When there's housing on the agenda, I always come with two hats on. One of them is lifelong practitioner in affordable housing, all the programs that are involved with that, running numbers and all that. The other one is I'm zoning chair at the Near East Area Commission, so I get to see kind of the housing market from that side in terms of what's presented to us, and that's very informative. I would like to say something about both topics that were talked about today. On the CRA matter, in the past, I have testified with some concern about the expansion of the program. Today, all I want to say is I really think we should restrict requirements to 60% of area median income, because more than that, it's just not really affordable housing. Under today's standards, 60% gross rents for one bedroom are $1,226, a two bedroom $1,471, a three bedroom $1,701. I think it's really hard to say that higher rents than that are actually affordable. Those rents are actually marginally above the calculated fair market rent for the Columbus metropolitan area. So that's really just 60% rents really are market in Columbus in terms of the average rents that are being charged. And I just think when we talk about 80 and 100% units being affordable, it's like, yeah, kind of, but no one takes that so seriously out in the community. And I think it contributes to the perception that the program is a bit of a giveaway. I'm not saying that's my view. I'm just saying the difficulty we have of selling that program to the public is not helped by calling 80 and 100% units affordable. On the question of the contract with Nuveen, now I'm putting my other hat on. Only with respect to the Sawyer Towers redevelopment, the Near East Area Commission has met with the Nuveen folks a couple times, and there's been community input. I would just say I would urge some caution on the city's part in terms of throwing full support behind what's being done there. Ultimately, we may achieve some compromise in terms of what's being proposed. What's currently being proposed is 382 units on that site. That is a very dense redevelopment. Part of it is an apartment building that's almost 500 feet long. That's a lot. It's massive. We looked at their presentation on that. I'm not saying it's terrible. It's just we're not sure that's in the best interest of the community. And we would just urge that, I know they want to submit that for funding. I understand full well. And it's not that we're against the project. It's just that we really need some opportunity to do some negotiation further with them about that. And that's an ongoing thing. But I'm concerned that what's happening is the train's just leaving the station, and that's going to be the end of it. So.
No, thank you, Roy. Let me hit on the Nuveen question point first. It is the train is not leaving the station.
Absolutely not.
The HDA still allows for the Area Commission to play the role that it is playing. I would tell you that in my conversations with Nuveen, the letter that the Area Commission sent was a huge part of our conversation, and I think that they are. It is everybody's expectation that they stay close to the Area Commission and try to work through. It did not seem to me from the letter nor the conversations with representatives from Nuveen that the space between the Area Commission and the proposal was that large that we could not get somewhere. So I am encouraged by your leadership in those conversations. The one question I would have for you though is you said that the 382.
That was the last proposal, yes, sir.
But remind me of the number of units of Sawyer Tower now.
It's 390. No.
It's three. It's three.
It's almost the same number that they're proposing to redevelop. And the concern is when you look around Columbus historically, there just hasn't been that great a track record with having very dense developments that are all for essentially poor people. The long-term sustainability of that, you also have Wedgwood in there, and that's a bigger project even, but that's been under various forms of ownership over the years, and it's these things tend to cycle down. We all think back to that project that used to be called Uzi Alley. I mean,
Sure.
I'm not saying this would become that. Don't get me wrong. They're a better company. They have great plans for it and all that. It's just concern to us, and I see that personally, having spent my whole career doing this kind of work, that when we kind of crowd things together that densely and all, it just doesn't always work out. And they have the best intentions in the world. It's just, we're urging them to like thin that out a little bit. So that's
Like I
that's
said.
what we've been urging them to do, and we haven't necessarily gotten
I mean,
to the
how
point yet.
do you respond to, again, let's think about what you were dealing with before, a high-rise tower. I mean, it was good times. And so you have a building that's that's lower, is spread out. It even gives the people a little bit better, and there's a lot of land over there too. And I'm sure, you're on the commission, there's other projects that are starting to come to the area. There's some people that are looking at Mount Vernon Plaza and everything like that. And if you go up Sinclair Avenue, obviously the cost of those houses are going up. And so it won't be back to the 60s when my family was there, when my family lived there and it was truly mixed income. But, I don't see this is all of a sudden we're creating this ghetto in this area. I don't see it. And you can look at Poindexter. How do you feel Poindexter is turning out at this point?
Right. Well, it's 7 acres,
Right?
and it's like, again, it could be great. It's just it scared us.
Sure.
We're all interested in the same thing. We all want it to succeed.
And what I would say, this is the larger point, is everybody is hearing the Near East Area Commission in good faith. So rest assured, you don't have to just trust us, but it is our expectation that Nuveen stays a good community partner. If they do move forward with this, they're going to be in Columbus doing this type of work for a long time. And so this is our expectation. And like I said, from what I read and even just hearing this conversation, they are not too far from where you are, but we are going to continue to respect the process of letting them engage with you. And when the next steps come before council, then we will check in to see how those conversations are going. Your first point around the CRA, I just want director to hit on one more time around why not go change the affordability requirements right now in this market, just to answer Mr. Lowenstein's question.
Of course.
Respond to.
Yes, thank you, Chair Harden. And when we look at what value we can capture, right? If we ask too much of that reduced rent, the tool itself will no longer be a viable tool. So it will no longer be there to help us build those units. It will no longer allow for any included units. So we calibrate very precisely how much value we can capture, and we do a gap analysis. And we look at things like construction costs and land costs. All of those things have grown. And what we don't want to do is wait until the rents are high enough to overcome those construction costs in order to deliver the units. So this is really about really bridging between a high construction cost, but wanting to make sure that we're getting units online. The other thing I'll say is they're not just less expensive. It's not just that rental rate. It also comes with the income restriction and the protection. So the folks in those units are protected from big rent swings. They are able to stably be housed over time in a way that the market rents aren't going to achieve. And then the final piece is these units are in our highest demand areas. These are affordable units. I understand the market rent for kind of the county or the city-wide. These units are specifically in those places that are most opportunity rich, and so they're driving those rents even higher than our market. And this is the one tool we have to include affordability, and it's difficult for our 100% affordable partners to be in those spaces because it is so competitive. And so it is bringing that affordability to a place that is really hard for folks to get into. And I think that's the opportunity for where we are today. We'll, as always, continue to look at those inputs around the cost, balancing it against what we can capture. And the team looks at it on a regular basis. And if at any point there was a significant shift where it's important to us to capture as much affordability, it is something that's deeply important to the team. we continue to look at those inputs and the ability to extrapolate it. But if we go too far, it will become a non-viable tool, so no included units, no units getting built in these high opportunity areas. And right now, that's where we are in the process. And I think we'll be looking forward, if there's changes in interest rates, if there's the ability to see lower construction material costs, we watch all of those things regularly.
Thank you. Thank you, Roy. I appreciate your comments, and we are not afraid of this debate. I think it needs to be happening in the open, and so we can understand how we use these different levers to bring more affordability, more housing stock in general to our region. Well, with that wraps up this hearing. As we move forward, increasing transparency around how these tools are used must remain a priority. We should strive for residents to understand not only how the CRA works, but also how it can be a force for community benefit. Over the past few years, we've seen a shift from not in my backyard to proudly saying yes in my background. And this is our chance to live that out loud, to say yes to more housing, yes to growth that reflects our values, and yes to using the tools that effectively, equitably, and transparently meet the needs of our neighborhood. So I thank you all for being a part of this conversation. We are all on this journey together. And again, the CRA and even the bond package dollars are just are individual tools that we all must use and stack on top of each other to build as much housing as we can right now as our community continues to grow. So thank you all, and that concludes this hearing.